Zeal Brothers here. Hey, want to make another video, this one about Joel Osteen. Many of you guys know about Joel Osteen. Joel Osteen is known for being a positive preacher. And recently I was just watching one of his sermons, and I'll post a link to that sermon in the description. And this sermon, it was well delivered. He is one who is very well practiced. He doesn't say he doesn't stutter. A lot of times if you watch our videos, because we don't edit it, we just go straight through. And sometimes you'll hear me stutter on a word. I'll say a word that I don't intend, or And Joel Osteen is so practiced and such a good speaker that he doesn't do that. He just pauses a little bit and he just continues. He might be reading the script, but I'm not so convinced that he is. He may literally be that gifted that he just can go off his little notes and go without stuttering, without making a mistake. He might be that good. And there are some people that are that gifted. So he is a very gifted speaker. He is a charismatic speaker. He exudes this energy. And that's really what the basis of charisma is this energy that a person will project. He exudes this energy. And in his doctrine, he promotes this positive doctrine, and he creates in it almost an attempt to be rational and promote something that's irrational. And I know that sounds weird, but I want you to look at that video that I'm going to put in the description. And when you watch it, there will be parts that if you are a Christian and you have a discerning eye, I have a very strong discerning eye, you will fall into the sway of it. It is very deceptive in how it's made. It almost reminds me, I'm a big person who likes to watch a lot of anime and read mangas and things like that. And there are some characters in there who can create illusions that'll trap you in it. Joel Osteen is an illusion creator. He can create these mirages and illusions that have you lost in them. And you'll be sitting there thinking, okay, I'm following along. I see what he's saying. And then if you take a step back and you look at yourself, you realize this isn't going anywhere. Now, let me substantiate my point. Joel Osteen's sermon was about the widow that fed Elijah. Elijah had once prayed that there will be a drought to judge the people of Israel. And when he prayed that there was a drought, God struck the people with this great drought. It was a great judgment. And after this great judgment hit the people of Israel, Elijah went away from the king and he was fed by God. Ravens literally brought him food and brought him meat. And he was sustained by that. But after a while, even that wasn't sustaining him anymore. And God said, go to this widow and she'll feed you. Well, he went to this widow, and this widow was about to starve herself. And he went to her and he said, hey, give me some water. She's like, cool, I'll get you some water, which is already an act of service. And then after that, he goes and says, hey, and make me some food too. Now she turns around at this point and she's like, okay, bro, I barely got enough bread for me and my son. I'm going to make one last meal for me and him. Then we're going to die. We're going to starve. We have no way to make a new meal for tomorrow. And Elijah's like, I hear you, but make it for me anyway, because the oil and the flour that you use will never run out. And Joel Osteen used that as a premise to talk about the fact that great steps of obedience will lead to great prosperity in your personal life. And that was the point that he was raising. And the analogies that he used, they all point to the fact of somebody doing something that he said would be irrational or didn't follow common sense. But because they obeyed God to the utmost, God blessed them in some way. And every example was always financial. And here's the thing. When you look at Joel Osteen's arguments, his arguments, some of them are sound. But when you connect them all together and you look at the implications, the larger implication is this. If you do good, God will bless you in some physical way. If you do good, you will be more lucky. You will be more fortunate. And that in itself is false. Now, I'll get to his greater falsehood first, but this minor falsehood is something that you have to understand first. The idea that your greater godliness will lead to greater blessings that will manifest themselves on this earth is false. Why can I say that? Because it's not proven in the greatest person who did the greatest act of obedience on this earth, Jesus. What was his benefit that he got on this earth? Very little. He didn't receive any physical benefit. He died on a cross, was crucified, mocked. Then he rose again in 3 days, and he literally was hiding away with his disciples. So when you look at Jesus's blessing, it doesn't manifest. A lot of these people talk about manifesting. It doesn't manifest. There was nothing that manifested for him. Paul gave up so much. At the end of his life, he was killed. John gave up so much. At the end of his life, he was exiled. All these holy men, when you look at them, they gave to the utmost. Now, some of them were blessed. You look at somebody like Job. He was definitely blessed. You look at like somebody like David or somebody like Solomon. These guys were physically blessed. But the principle of godliness is not that God will always bless you in some physical way, but rather that God will fulfill and he requires obedience, first of all. And his requirement of obedience is met with blessing, but it will not necessarily be something that you can see improve on this side. You have to believe God even if you're the widow and you do die tomorrow. That's the harsh truth. So that's the falsehood that's introduced first. It is taking a godly principle and twisting it just a little bit. But there's a larger falsehood, and it's one that is simply not said, because the whole premise of the story that is missed is that God is judging everyone in the region because of sin. And that's why they're suffering. Everybody is suffering because Elijah prayed that God would judge people for sin. And this is something that is not being talked about. So he'll spend a whole sermon talking about great blessings and greater opportunities because great obedience, and forget the fact that the whole premise of the story, the whole reason the story exists is because of God's judgment, because he doesn't want to talk about judgment. And so when you look at somebody like Joel Osteen, a lot of people say, man, why do you hate on Joel Osteen? It's because he preaches a lie. But the lies are often minor twists and omissions. And if you don't have a discerning eye, you won't catch it. I fear for you guys who don't catch it. But I also understand my purpose is to point it out for those who can't. And my point is that when you look at somebody like Joel Osteen, if he makes you feel good, realize he is giving you spiritual candy, not spiritual meat. He's not giving something that will sustain you for a lifetime. He's getting something that will make you feel good for a few minutes. And a lot of his people in his congregation, and a lot of people who go through that form of Christianity, they suffer from what I will call spiritual diabetes. They go from these highs and these lows, these ecstasy moments and these great depression. And the reason that they do is because they have a hard time seeing what God is doing when they're in bad times, because they think that they disobey God when they're going through tough times, not realizing that sometimes you're just appointed tough times. Sometimes there may not be some great reward at the end of a tough times. Sometimes it's just the time that your mom died. Sometimes it's just the time that your marriage broke up. Sometimes it's just the time that your kid decided to go wild. And you simply have to accept that as a season in your life. And that requires great faith, because you can't always see the reward for that. And you may not see the reward for it. That's real Christianity, but that's hard. And a lot of people don't want to hear that. But that's what you need to hear. You need to hear the truth.